I'm going to put this brand new XR2 system into this shiny new TRX4. That's the all-new Traxxas Bronco with the, what I think is a very cool body mount system. There's clips that hook the body into the fenders and it pops off with no body clips. So this is very cool. Why do I have this brand new Bronco? While we were at TDS, we of course passed the transmitters around and people got to drive RC cars, and a couple riders got RC fever, and I'd like to do a little personal shopping now and again. My local hobby shop is nice enough to help me out with lots of questions and answers about what they have in stock, and I get to occasionally take a brand new rig, butter it up, and then send it off to its happy new owner. This one's going to get a servo upgrade, and of course the horn. We're going to put a shiny new XR2 2100 kV system in there and show you how I do an install. So first things first, you got to take the old system out. There's a lot of ways you can go about doing it, but because it has to get unplugged, I kind of start at the receiver box almost every time. You don't have to use an electric screwdriver, but it sure makes it a lot more fun to pretend you're using power tools. And the throttle channel is, well, the third one, because these have two steering channels, so you got to be a little bit careful when you're plugging stuff in and out around here. But man, look at all these wires. All right, and that loops underneath the antenna wire. Like, this can be a little tricky sometimes to get this wire out of this area, so I a lot of times just cut the plastic arm there because it'll still retain the wires and everything. Just make sure that you don't cut the wires, because then you'd have a speed control that's useless. That way you can just pull that out of the way and it keeps on holding. There's one zip tie under here that needs to be dispatched and probably replaced. Get him out. You can unplug this from the motor, and we're also obviously going to take the motor out. The TRX4 is another one of the Traxxas vehicles that uses the letter motor mount. So just before you take this apart, we're going to put this back together using this same pinion gear on the new motor. So just make sure you pay attention to what letters they are, or it's in the instruction manual too. And we're also doing a servo upgrade, so we're actually going to unplug the steering servo as well. You got to be pretty careful when you're poking these input harnesses around, because you can tear them real easily with a wrench, so use caution. So easiest way is to undo the steering link. Oh man. This thing looks like it already has a metal servo horn in it, so that's an upgrade. So you take the drag link off, that way it's out of the way, and then the servo screws are a 2.5. And then this last one, you want to be careful so you don't like ruin the servo harness. You go kind of slow, because it's good to keep your RTR servos as backup spares, or if you're building a car or just need something to do some testing with. These servos are great. And look at that. It comes with a metal horn already. Well, how about that? Okay, so we're going to leave the shift servos alone. This is the TRX4. I guess I'd call it the regular TRX4. Has the high-low gear, front and rear lockers. And pro tip, if you have a TRX4 and you want your servos to last forever, just listen to them. These shifting mechanisms have a spring load in there, but when the truck gets dirty and nasty, sometimes the shift linkages aren't going to want to pop in and out without some finicking, so you got to flip the switch a couple times and make sure you hear the servo move all the way and engage, and it won't be sitting there buzzing and humming. Keep your shift servos alive a whole lot longer. Next up, I think we're going to pop the new servo in, because that part's easy. We're going to put in the Traxxas 400-ounce waterproof servo, because why not? And then when you're installing a new servo, don't just put the horn on there right away. You're going to want to do your final adjustment on your servo horn once the vehicle's powered up and this servo centered. So I'm actually going to install the servo horn onto the servo at the very end when we're doing final checks. There's a little wire catch right there to help keep the servo nice and tidy. And then steering servo is channel number 1. There's 2 of them, so be careful. I guess it doesn't really matter, but just make sure that you use one or the other, and don't put your speed control in there as well, because that happens all the time. So next up is the Axe R2 combo. There is a little bit of soldering to do, or soldering if you are from lands of foreignness, and we'll walk through all those basics here. It's pretty straightforward. If you haven't seen one of my soldering videos before, just remember, always work in a well-ventilated area, wear some eye protection, don't solder in bare feet because solder splashes land on your toes. If you're going to be doing a lot of connector soldering, have a block of wood. I use 60-40 rosin core lead tin solder is what it is. If you can't find the old-fashioned leaded solder like that, make sure that you have a little bit of flux. It makes the job a whole lot easier. And I think we mentioned this is the new Axe R2 and the 2100 kV 540L. It's called a 540L because it's slightly longer than a normal 540 motor, but should fit almost all the vehicles a-okay. So there's a couple things that I do to almost every axe that I install, and because of what we're doing, we hardly ever need the fans. So I don't really run the fans on my axes ever. I'm not telling you that you don't need a fan. Use your best judgment. But for the most part, you can run these things for a while and not get them too hot. And the beauty of my rock crawlers lately, or my scalers if you will, is everything's kind of been waterproof. So if it gets too hot, I just go drive it in the water. I know that's not the way to do it, but I mean, I can't say that I've overheated it because I'm always driving it in the water. So I don't know. Also, if you do retain the fan, you want to make a fan protector for it. If anything happens, you crash upside down, something flops onto the fan, these blades can get broken pretty easily. So the easiest thing to do is to cut like a section of zip tie and go diagonal across the two fan screws that hold it on. Drill 2 little holes in there, and then it helps the fan last forever. I bring that up a lot because people break fans. And then the other thing that I like to do is I shorten up my battery leads. Like, that's pretty long battery leads, maybe way too long. So I cut that to about half the length that they are and then solder it back on. So we'll just do that. Here, I got nice hot iron. You need a chisel tip, works better than the pencil tip or tin or the thin pointy ones because you have a flat surface area to work with. When you're going to take off the factory solder, because it's a lead free, it's going to need a lot of temperature. So I run my iron at about 750 to 850 Fahrenheit most of the time. And if you tin it like that, it'll usually slide right out. You just have to have a little bit of solder on your, fresh solder on your soldering iron tip to help the heat transfer. And when I do wiring, I like to use a pair of proper wire strippers so that when you strip the leads, that you don't get the little cut strands all over the place. Those can kind of ruin your day. When you're tinning the wires for install, I lay them on their side or kind of downward if I can, so the solder doesn't wick into the wire. That can be problematic for good connections, and you'll end up with kind of stiff, non-flexible wires with a bunch of solder inside of them. Contrary to popular belief, solder is a terrible conductor, and you only want it to kind of use to hold things in place. The wire wants to be pushed down through the pool of solder that's on the connector so that it can make contact with the actual post. For this rig, I'm laying the wires in this direction because they're going to kind of poke up in the air because the battery has a huge lead on it. And then, like I said, you just want a little bit of heat. You push it down through so that it gets down onto the actual solder post, and it's not floating in the solder. That can make for false shutdowns. There's a little bit of extra wire on there. And I use a pair of flush cutters, and I'll just cut that. Not cutting the post, obviously, just the wire, so that it's not like dangling off all lame out there. That looks a little cleaner. And then next thing I'm going to do is the motor. And for the motor, for the most part, you could just tin these wires and solder them right on and you'd be good to go. I am going to flush cut all of them, re-tin them, and do them again just so that we can have soldering demo in my video. And I like to make them all like identical length. Doesn't have to be, like the wires don't, it's been a wives' tale for a while that the wires have to be exactly the same length. Sure, technically speaking, you know, that's going to be more electrically sound, but it's not necessary. Like to twist these nice and tight. Another one that helps is a set of spring-loaded or locking needle nose tweezers, and that way you can keep the wires kind of in place. People like those third hands. I'm not a fan of those. But for these guys, I just do, again, an even layer, one simple coat, if you will, of solder onto the wires. You don't need to put a ton in there, but you do want to cover all the exposed leads or strands of wire so that you don't have loose strands exposed, so that when you go to solder it onto the posts, everything stays nice and tight together. Ooh, solder splash. That's what I'm talking about. The molten liquid solder, like that falls on your foot. Ooh, it's a hot dance. And then I also like to tin these tabs as well, just with a little bit, help the heat transfer when you're going to put everything in place. For any censored system, whether it be an axe or otherwise, the sequence of the wires matters. A has to be A, B has to be B, and C has to be C, unless your speed control has special settings for that, which some of the racing stuff does these days. So paying close attention to my letters. One. Ooh, that one's a little bit long, so I'm going to pre-cut it. Doesn't hurt to give the wires just a touch of a twist when you're getting them into their final resting place. Helps kind of spool the wire, the strands of wire together. So checking again that I got my ABC right, because you can never check too many times. And then the sensor harness for this is waterproof and keyed, so make sure that you put it together correctly. Otherwise, you're gonna have a real bad time. It's not gonna work right. Next up, I'm gonna move the motor plate and the pinion gear onto the axe. These are 2.5 millimeter screws that hold the motor to the mounting plate, and it's a 1.5 millimeter screw that holds the pinion onto the motor. All right, so I left those screws in. It's in C, or in the third one. And then the motor is going to sit like that with the wires going up, so we're going to use those two holes. Something that I run into every once in a while, I got RC friends that come from full-size mechanic world, and they really like to tighten their screws. It's RC cars. Like, snug is all you need. I have small, child-sized hands, and they are more than strong enough to put together an RC car that doesn't fall apart. So you just got to snug stuff up. Make sure that you get the set screw on the flat, as far as like distance out to the motor screw is whatever. But we're gonna stick it in the truck and check and make a final adjustment on the pinion gear location front to back. Motor's gonna go in, and I'm just pushing this into place to see if I got my pinion gear location correct. And it looks like I'm off by a little bit, so that needs to come back about 1 millimeter. There you go, there's your point of reference. If you take your wrench and you go even with the head of the screw through, you know, your set screw wrench, and you just make that parallel, touching the screw, that should be perfect. Yeah, look at that. All right, good enough for me. Motor's in there. You kind of, these guys, you don't have to worry too much about the gear mesh, but I always check anyway, just in case. I try to hold it square and look, just to make doubly sure that everything was in there correctly. Because I never drove this thing at all, so who knows if it was right or wrong from go. So motor is in. The wires for the speed control are going to lay quite nicely. Ooh, I think maybe that's going to be the way. So the motor wires are kind of going out the back, battery wires to the front. We're going to replace that zip tie that keeps these wires safe just in case. They get sandwiched under here pretty darn good, so there's not a whole lot to worry about. And I like to leave these a little bit loose so that in case you need to make some wire twists or adjustments, that you can do that. All right, so that should sit right there. We keep that over here. I'm gonna double side tape this guy, and then I like to move the speed control as far in as I can and still keep it kind of above or on the plastic mount. And I want to make sure it's not rubbing up against the servo and it's not rubbing up against that mount, so that if anything does happen, it's not in there vibrating against a hard surface. And then, because we snipped this before, we can slide this guy inside to that very easily. Oh, I said very easily. Keeps that snugged away. Wrap that around the side. I think I got that all in there. These are all black wires. You have to pay attention to which way you plug them in. The edge of the plug is marked opposite where you can see the brass coloring. So negative is that one, and that always on most receivers goes towards that outside edge. Speed control, we mentioned this once before, goes in channel number 2, which is looks like that should be able to remain the same. Keep that antenna wire kind of tucked out of the way. Now, when you're doing this final step, make sure you're not pinching any of these wires under that edge, because that'll happen. All right, so receiver's all buttoned back up. Now, if you haven't checked updates and done automatic motor pairing, you're gonna not wanna do this step until the very end, and we'll talk about that later. So now that we have an install done, we're ready to hook up a battery and do calibration. Oh man, almost forgot to put the screw in the battery mount back. Pro tip, when you heat up your double-side tape, it actually sticks a little better. Just don't melt it. Now what I'm going for there is to get the switch wire mostly used up without it being dangling or without it being too tight. So this is a 3-cell 50C 5200 milliamp. For rock crawl stuff, 50C seems to be okay for the most part. It's not going to give you too many issues, but for go fast stuff, you kind of want a little more than that. Well, once you get the install done, a lot of times folks will turn it on and drive around, but you're not ready for that yet. You still have to calibrate it. So radio's on, this is throttle, that's my reverse and brake. You have to hold down the set button while you're turning the speed control on to initiate the process. Hold down the set button, turn it on, and keep holding the set button. It's going to start to beep at us. There we go. Then you tap it to set neutral. Then you hold it full throttle, tap it again. Then you hold it full reverse and tap it again. Beeps once, twice, 3 times, lets us know that it's all done. And at the end, we get operation. So as you can see, I'm giving it throttle, but it's going backwards. So you're not going to reverse the radio to fix that. You're going to go into the speed control settings and change the motor rotation. We'll do that now. So if any of that doesn't work as far as calibration, or when you get done with the calibration, you have problems, or if you've done a firmware update and you have problems, check the description down below. We have some videos that'll get that taken care of for you. You have to redo your automatic motor pairing anytime you do a firmware update or anytime you change the motor out. Automatic motor pairing is different than the radio calibration. You have to unplug it from the receiver and disconnect the pinion. But like I said, check the link in the description down below. It'll show you how to troubleshoot for calibration problems or for automatic motor pairing issues. So if you haven't downloaded the app yet, go to your app store, punch in HWLink V2, install that, and you'll be ready to go. First thing is, this is a Bluetooth connection. So when you install the app, you want to tell it to use Bluetooth, and you do not have to pair the phone to your speed control. The app takes care of all of that. So to start the process, my radio is turned on right now. I'm going to turn the speed control on. I got a red light on the button. It beeps at us, and I tap this little link right here. It asks me which speed control I want. I want that one. Your default password is all number 8s if this is the first time you've used it. It even tells you right there. Then you hit confirm, and it starts to connect. Once you're connected, the little link icon is now lit up. You can go into the parameters to change the speed control. You can go to firmware update to check for firmware updates. Settings is for the app, and if your speed control has data logging, you can check it here. Also in the data log is your real-time data. So if your speed control has real-time data output, that is available here. You can't really see that, but the Axe does have real-time data output. So just to give you a glimpse of that, you can see your voltage, the current draw, throttle position, RPM. It's pretty cool, temperatures, all that. But what we're here for is to just get it up and running. So the first thing that we're going to do is jump into parameters, and while it loads that, we're going to go down to the motor rotation and change that. That's all you have to do if you wanted to get going. Slide down to motor rotation, switch that to clockwise, and then hit save. At that stage, you could, once it's done saving, you can disconnect by hitting the little icon, turn the speed control off, turn it back on, and you're ready to go. But since we're in here, we're going to talk about what all these settings do. So running mode is forward and reverse. You see it doesn't have forward, brake, and reverse like a normal race car speed control. We have that now. Axe R2 has forward, reverse with brake for bashing purposes, which I think is pretty neat. So running mode will allow you to take it out of rock crawl mode and go into basher mode, which is cool. Cutoff voltage is your LiPo cutoff level. You can get more runtime or less runtime. Low is about probably 3.3 per cell. Intermediate's probably about 3.6, 3.7 per cell, and high is above 3.7 per cell. And you can also turn it off in case you're running nickel metal hydrides or not worried about your LiPo cutoff. RPM throttle matching. This is sort of turning up or down the sensitivity of the system's FOC tech. The FOC allows very precise RPM matching. That's why you got this AXE system. And this allows you to give it a little bit of stall, if you will, like brushed motors. So if you like it to, when you run into a rock, have a little bit of fade or stall or not RPM match so perfectly, you can turn that up or down here. Intermediate is default and works extremely well. You can turn down the forward throttle speed. So let's say you get 3 cells and you don't want the kids to go punching it around on your 3 cells. You can jump in here and limit the speed controls full throttle. Same for the reverse as well. I like to have a little more reverse than that. So I usually turn this up to about 75%. Hit confirm, hit save to save the setting. And then it'll save that for us. Now, the fun stuff, this has turbo timing and turbo delay. What this is it applies electronic timing advance to the motor to give you more wheel speed. So it comes at a cost. Advanced timing creates a little more heat and a little less runtime, but we have so much runtime anyway. And it only goes up to 10 degrees, which is not a lot, but for a rock crawl, it's something. And you can set the delay, so how long after full throttle comes on. If you have it set to 0, it's basically seamless. You're just going to get higher speed. And people are like, well, why wouldn't you do that? Well, for runtime temperatures, if you run in aggressive gearing, you don't want to run any timing. But for this, I like to turn my turbo delay all the way up so I can hear it. It's kind of like having turbo or boost lag, if you will, on the setup. So I think that's fun. So jump up there, hit save. So I got my turbo set at 10 degrees with a delay of half a second. So when I get to full throttle, you hear it wind up. Drag brake force is how strong your neutral brake is. And for the most part, 80% is pretty strong to me. You don't need to be up that high. I like to have kind of lower drag brake because it's still plenty. So I go all the way down to 60%. Sorry, the screen's not showing up very well. And then I hit save every time just out of force of habit. And then drag brake increase rate. This is a very cool one, and I like to run this on the super sweet auto mode. It makes it speed sensing so that if you're going fast, it applies the drag brake slow. If you're going slow, it applies the drag brake fast. Very cool feature. I use that all the time, no matter what, on my AXE combos. Control range is your dead zone, if you will, between your throttle and your brakes. So if you got a real twitchy throttle, your drag brakes are inconsistent, the car seems like it wants to coast, and this is all after you've done the calibration, you can turn the neutral range up to help compensate for that. Throttle increase rate. This is like your punch setting on a race car speed control, and what it is how linear the throttle is. So I go all the way up to have it the most linear just because I like a real one-to-one feeling. Level 9 is the highest, and if you have like very weak batteries or bad plugs, or maybe it's super cold outside and you're getting a lot of cutoffs when you give it the gas, you can turn that throttle increase rate down to help cover that or mask it, if you will. BEC voltage is the power output to your receiver and your servos. You can do 6 volts or 7.4. And then motor rotation, like we talked about before, is the forward rotation of the motor. And a lot of rock crawlers, they need clockwise rotation, so that's why we jumped in here and changed that first. And then it also confirms your KV on your motor as well. And then you can change the name of your profile. I like to do at least the profile so that when we get in here and start messing with different speed controls and who's what, we can tell whose is who. So I'm going to put Arthur on here because this vehicle is going to a dude named Arthur. And save, confirm, and then when you're all done, you can either back out this way and hit the link to exit, and you just disconnect, and then you're done. Put that away, turn the speed control off, turn the speed control back on. It wants to cycle on its own, and then we'll see. So I'm gonna put the servo back on. So when you go to put your servo in, you want to set your servo trim, or your servo horn, you want to make sure that you square up your servo trim. It's not too often that I get to use my ball and wrench to save the day, but this is one of those times. There is Loctite on that screw. This is the turbo delay. You'll hear it go to full throttle, then pick up. I'm just holding it in one spot, watch. It's like, you know, rock boost. So rad. So if you haven't seen a TRX4 before, it's pretty cool. It's got a high-low gear, so you get high-low shifting, and then you can unlock the front, unlock the rear, so you can go from full-time four-wheel drive to locked or unlocked front or rear. If you change out the radio, you can get independent control and kind of either run full unlocked or full lock, but with this set you can only lock or unlock one side or the other. And then you have your high or low down here, which is very cool. And then you shift it. That's first gear, second gear. Much faster. But there you have it, a full install on the shiny new. This is a 2021 Bronco TRX4. We're leaving the body under wraps because this is not my truck. This is going to Arthur, who is one of the bike dudes that we met through Semperfi Fund and got nerd fever at TDS. So if you haven't seen the previous episodes of the Charlie Show about TDS, please check down below for the links. If you do have any questions, comments, or concerns, shoot us an email. NorthAmerica@Hobbywing.com. And don't forget, you can win free RC stuff. Just tune into our podcast. It's on your favorite podcast service. Search for RC Stuff powered by Hobbywing or go to anchor.fm/Hobbywing. Thanks for watching, everybody.